Bracha v'shalom, right? Shalom bracha, you don't say to a lady, but bracha v'shalom you could say. And you know, right, you know the reason why. The Rebbe said it in a Sikha that shalom is a greeting. Shalom means hello. But when they translate it in English, they can't say chas v'shalom hello because you'll actually know what it means. So they translate it as greeting, so no one's sure what it means. So it's good to English. Bracha means blessing. But shalom means hello. So the Rebbe said that the Friedrich Rebbe, when he wrote to women, used to write bracha v'shalom because you're not allowed to greet a woman. Api halacha, for a man to greet a woman is not his own wife, is not poshet. So you say bracha. Oh, b'shalom is a good zach. Shalom is a good thing. So bracha v'shalom is not shalom bracha. It's not like shalom aleichem and aleichem shalom. Shalom means peace. So bracha v'shalom means blessing and peace. Shalom bracha means hello and blessing. So you're getting even a bigger bracha. The shalom bracha is hello and bracha, and bracha v'shalom means the bracha and the bracha of shalom. I think the last Tanya class was Zayin Elul. I think the last Tanya class is Zayin Elul. Today is Dalet Bar Cheshvan. It's literally 8 weeks. Tzvei Chadoshim. Anyway, we're learning Tanya. We're learning Tanya. We do every Sunday Baruch Hashem for a very long time. And we're in the middle of Perek Yutes. We're on page Chav Dalet Amud Beis, which I guess is page 48. And I have been obsessing over the word Teva. If you were here 2 months ago, Zayin Elul, I tried to listen this morning to the class that I gave then. I'm obsessing over the word Teva. Because it seems to me that the Alter Rebbe is trying to propose to us that there's two very, very different uses of the word Teva. And we talk about this a lot in Tanya. I'm teaching Tanya here for the third time, which means we started Tanya probably 25 years ago, maybe even longer. We're learning here. These classes are close to 30 years old. And in this time around, when we did Perek Yud Beis, about Moyach Shalt Al Halev, the Rebbe also calls it Teva. So I talked about the word Teva there in Perek Ches, Tanya chapter 8. I also spoke about the word Teva. I think it's one of the subtexts of the Tanya that gets lost. You know, Tanya is Teresh B'Ksav. Every single word is Genoi. It's precise. What does Teva normally mean? Teva normally means klipa, really. Teva normally means a limitation. Now, the true meaning of the word limitation isn't that I'm limited. Everything is limited except for the Eibishter. The true meaning of the word Teva is I'm limited and I can't go out of my limit. That's why Teva is klipa. If I'm limited and I can break out of my limited, then I'm not really limited. I'm limited at the moment, but I can exceed it. Teva means I'm in a certain situation and I cannot exceed it. I can't go past my Teva. I can't exceed it. That's why often Teva is associated with klipa. Animals have a Teva. Human beings have a Teva. And in the Tanya, the word Teva comes up again and again and again and again, if you pay attention. One of the most disappointing uses of the word Teva is that when a person is doing an Aveda, he's not just going against the will of Hashem and the instructions of Hashem, he's actually going against his nature. The Eibishter gave a human being a nature. He gave animals a nature. Even predatory animals, even animals that kill. And the Pasuk says, that animals' natures guards them. In other words, an animal is whatever animals are created to be. Some animals are killers, they're evil. But even their killing has parameters, has been medida of Akbala, based on the Teva that the Eibishter gave them. And a human being can go lower than his Teva. Not lower than the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lower than his Teva. This is why it says, Ein Adam Eiver Aveda. Elim Kei Nichnas Bei Ruach Shtus. When a person is doing an Aveda, it's a Ruach Shtus. Not it's a Ruach Shtus against the Nifshel Kiss. It's a ruach shtus against the teva of the nefesh habahamis. And I've mentioned to you many times, another thing that I obsess about, that in the Rebbe, one of his Maimorim, Basi Lagani, Toshin Yud talks about Goyim. He says Goyim also have a teva. And again we mean the nefesh habahamis. And the teva of a Goy is that it can't be over on the Zayin mitzvahs b'nei noyach. Just like a Yid cannot be over on Taryag mitzvahs, that's his teva. So a Goy cannot be over the Zayin mitzvahs b'nei noyach. And when a Goy doesn't aved, it's against the teva of the nefesh habahamis. That's why the Gemara says Yitush kodmach. A person doesn't aved is worse than a mosquito, worse than an animal that's machnas ve'enei moitzi, because they cannot go lower than their teva, and we are. So normally, the word teva is associated with klipa, and the concept of teva is, like the Gemara says, the lashon ein chavush mater, it's atzme beis asurim. My teva, my nature is my containment, is my limitation. That's why teva is connected to klipa, because a person cannot go out of his nature the way the Eibishter made him. But there's two sides to teva, Right. So when it comes to bechira chovshis, when it comes to Teira mitzvahs, we can exceed our teva on both sides. We can see it going up above the teva, and we can unfortunately descend below the teva. But the teva is the way the Eibishter made us, and the way I understand it, that this teva is even the teva of the nefesh habahamis. The nefesh habahamis has a limit of how bad it'll fall and how good it'll become. A yid can go lower than that teva exercising free will, and a yid can go higher than that teva also exercising free will. But the nature of a human being is, the teva of a person is, he will not go against the will of Hashem. Just like the teva of Bilam, right, in Tachai Chavdalet, yeah? Bilam was the biggest Rasha in the world. He said, I'll do as much evil as I could, but I can't go against my nature. And my nature has allowed me to do something which is against what the Eibishter lets me do. And this is how we understand the word teva in convention in Tanya. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. We talk about nefesh elokis and nefesh habahamis, and we talk about the fight, and we talk about nefesh elokis winning, nefesh habahamis losing, and the possibility of it being the other way around. And one of the components of the drama, besides for the fact that you have a nefesh elokis and nefesh habahamis, and they're both trying to take over the body and so on and so forth, that even the nefesh habahamis has a teva. But the teva of nefesh habahamis has two limits. It cannot go higher than a certain point, and it cannot go lower than a certain point. And a yid can, Nachmanu litzlan, using free will, fall lower. And a yid can, b'sayata d'shmaya, kadosh baruch hu ezrei, go past his teva on the side of kedusha. This concept of teva appears in the Tanya many times. It's the personality of the creation. It's the programming that the Eibishter gave each creation. In our Perek, we have another use for the word teva, a very different use for the word teva. And the quotable quote is, "V'teva zeh, ki shem hamushal l'chol davar, she'einei bebechinas tam v'das." It's on page 48. The line that begins with the word bitiva. If you were here 2 months ago, I know it's so silly to say, if you remember the class I gave you 2 months ago, we talked about the word teva. We obsessed over the word. 4 or 5 or 6 times in this page, Alter Rebbe uses the word teva. So the line that begins with the word bitiva, it's a little bit more than halfway down the page, it says, v'teva zeh, the word teva in this case, is shem hamushal, is a borrowed term, l'chol davar, to anything, she'einei bebechinas tam v'das, which you cannot explain. What are we It's a very different use of the word. It's the same Hebrew word, but it doesn't mean what teva normally means in Tanya. I guess I should say one more thing on this, that the Rebbe, the Maimonides Hasidus, whenever they talk about the word teva, and opposite of that, there's the word nes, they bring Sha'al S'tshuvas Chacham Tzvi. The Maimonides, the Rebbe brings Sha'al S'tshuvas Chacham Tzvi was the father of Rabbi Yankov Emden, of the Javits, of Yankov Emden, of Yavitz. And there's a cloud godel in Hasidus, that if the Rabbeim bring a sefer in the Maimorim, not in the Sichos, if the Rabbeim bring a sefer in the Maimorim, it's because the Rabbeim held that that sefer was written Beruch HaKodesh. Sha'al S'tshuvas Chacham Tzvi was times the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rabbeim bring him, and he translates the word nes and the word teva. And when it comes to the word teva, this is still the first translation of teva. I'm stepping back a little bit. The first word teva is Like for the word matbeya. Matbeya means a mint that makes multiple copies of the same thing. And the second translation of the word teva is the word tuvu b'yamsuf, to be immersed, like a person who's drowning. Meaning to say, when a person's life is predictable, that's what repetition means, and they can't get out of it, which is what being immersed is, then it's called your nature. And that's why teva is associated with klipa, with a containment that you can't exceed. I always give the bushel from an exoskeleton, right? Some animals have bones, some animals have no bones. So how do they hold themselves up? They have a shell. The shell is hard, but the shell doesn't grow. So they're stuck inside the shell. When the animal grows, it has to molt, it has to lose its shell and get a new one. And if the shell breaks, they die. Teva is a containment that you cannot exceed. That's what it is. This is the conventional use of the word. And again, I'm repeating, but in our Pedic, we have a very different use of the word teva. And in this Pedic, the Rebbe says, we're using the word teva here to describe something that you can't explain. Now there's a very big difference between the first use of the word teva, which means my personality, my container, my containment, my box that the Eibishter gave. Again, the Lashon HaGemara is, Ein chavush materes atzme beis hasurim. A prisoner cannot redeem himself from his own incarceration. This is a Lashon HaGemara. Klipa has a meiser, has a golus. And the golus of Klipa, it doesn't necessarily have to be bad. It's the containment of Klipa, it's the box of Klipa that Klipa cannot go out of. That's all it is. And every creation has its teva, has its containment, its limitation. Here we're saying the word teva when something exists and it's not logical, you call it teva. And what is that? In a word, the power of Mesiras Nefesh. The idea that in a Yiddish neshama, there's a readiness to give itself away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without any cheshbenis. B'li tam, v'das, v'seichel, muvan, u'musik. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, tam, v'das, v'seichel, muvan, u'musik is chaya, yechida, neshama, ruach, nefesh. It's beyond me. But when somebody has a capacity, in as much as we have a capacity, to be Mesiras Nefesh, give ourselves away to Elokus without any interest that's for ourselves, this is also called teva, but this is not a limitation. This is above, it's completely above logic. When a person acts in his relationship with the Eibishter in a way of complete sacrifice, it's also called teva. So we have two uses of the word. We have the use of the word teva, that I'm stuck, and we have the use of the word teva, that I'm acting in a way which is impossible to explain. They're opposites, ben akotza lakotza. They're very different. What's the constant? The constant is, and I'm using these words with a little bit of hesitation, that I'm not in control. Hashem gave me my teva, my personality. I'm limited in my personality. That's number one. And Hashem gave me a neshama, which gives me a teva that I'm prepared to be Mesiras Nefesh al kiddush Hashem. Now again, the form of our Pedic is the fire of a candle that wants to go up to kedusha, and it wants to lose itself in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's going to lose its metzias completely. And the Alter Rebbe says every creation was created to want to exist. The most basic instinct is survival. The idea that in a creation there could be this desire to become one with Hashem and lose itself is therefore the opposite of the nature of the world. And it's called teva, but in this case it's not called teva because this is its container. It's called teva because it's l'mayla mitam das, it's above reason. This has been the spirit of how I've been presenting you the Tanya here in our Pedic. There's two, the teva of a yid is that even the nefesh habahamis is called a shade mishade in Yehudoyin. These are the words of the Alter Rebbe, which means the nefesh habahamis nature is to do Torah mitzvahs. The nefesh habahamis nature is that he cannot do an aveira, but it's a learned behavior, right? That's why whatever the process is, it's going lower than your nature. This Alter Rebbe says in Perek Chav Dalet.
So why then isn't Mesiras Nefesh just part of a Yid's teva?
Because teva is a limitation. Right. Teva is in the nefesh habamis. Yeah. Nefesh habahamis cannot give itself away to the Eibishter. It's klipa. Now, but then klipa also has a personality. An insect has a personality. A being has a personality. An insect's personality makes it do whatever it does, and it's not going to go outside of that personality. A human being, a yid and a goy, have a personality. That personality was designed by the Creator to include conformity, to do what He wants from them, but not more and not less. Mesiras Nefesh is more than that. So now we're talking about a teva which is in the neshama, not a teva which is a nefesh habahamis. This is how I understand it, and I'm saying the word. This is how I understand it. I'm so sure that this is the pshat, but I'm also so sure that I'm on thin ice. You understand? I've been teaching Tanya for my adult life, my whole adult life, and I'm constant. Tanya is one of those svarim that you always learn more. This discovery for me is new. In other words, when I taught Tanya last time, I didn't teach you that there's two teva, I taught you that there's one teva, just like you said. But the more I think about it, the more it seems to me, mir durchzach, it seems to me that the Alter Rebbe's use of the word zeh, but teva zeh shem hamushal, because it's not the same as teva that you have in Perek Ches and in Perek Yud Beis and in Perek Chav Daled, and so many other places in the Tanya. Because normally teva means a limitation. Here, teva means to do something which is completely the opposite of a limitation.
That is part of the box.
Right. Masha'enke, the other word of teva is the nefesh habamis.
So it's a very, just have to talk about the nefesh.
Right. It's two different uses of the word teva. So why do you use the same word for both? Because one shows unpredictability, and the other one shows an unpredictability. The constant is that it's not, you can't change it. This is what the Eibishter made you to be. Now I just want you to know, and I'm saying this parenthetically, so I'm not going to speak about it at length, at least not here. You know, there's a maimer that everybody loves to call the maimer that the Rebbe killed Stalin. I'm saying it simply because it's dramatic. In 1991, in Tov and Aleph, for Purim, the Rebbe was Magia, the maimer, Al Kain Karu La Yom Me'ere Purim Hashem HaPur. It was a maimer the Rebbe said in the middle of the night, late at night, Purim Tavshin Yud Gimel. It was the second maimer in the Farbrengen, and Stalin died mamish then. 53.
You said 1991.
No, the Rebbe gave it out. It was Magiat in 91. When the Rebbe gave out the maimer Mugad, they wrote in the Psach Dover that this maimer was connected with the death of Seder b'Medina Ha'i, and the Rebbe left it in. The Rebbe edited the Hagdama, the Psach. In other words, the Rebbe confirmed that this is emes. That maimer is a very scholarly maimer. It looks like when the Rebbe said it was very short. There's no tape of it, but the Hanoch is very short. The Hanoch is 2 pages, and the way it's mugit, it's very big. It's a big maimer. There's a long footnote there where the Rebbe is struggling with this. When you say that a yid has a pinta leyid, and because a yid has a pinta leyid, he's meisa nefesh b'lishum ta'am v'das v'ta'ine u'mayne klal. A yid is meisa nefesh without any cheshbon. Ki'ilu dava she'i efshe klal lich with the shem echad, as if he can't help himself. So the Rebbe says, you're going to tell me that when a yid is meisa nefesh, there's no free will? This the Rebbe's kasha. If we're calling Mesiras Nefesh teva, and the reason we're calling it teva is because it's consistent with the other teva of Nefesh Habamis, in that the person, so to speak, has no control. The Alter Rebbe uses that expression in Tanya in the last page, chapter 18. And the Maimorim, they certainly bring it. That Mesiras Nefesh, not Yechida, it's E.F. Shaliyas Be'erif V'nacha Klal Chas V'Shalom. It cannot be any other way. So the Rebbe says there's no free will when it comes to this teva. And the Rebbe says impossible. There has to be free will. Because the Rambam writes that free will is the Iker Godel. It's a very important principle. And it's impossible to say that the Eibush would take away our free will. Now the Rebbe doesn't explain how. He just states that. On the one hand, Mesiras Nefesh is a teva. Teva means it's beyond seichel. Teva zeh, who shema mushal l'chaldov v'sheni b'chinas tavadas. And the Rebbe wants to somehow explain how there could be free will at the same time. How that works, I don't know. I'm just telling you that there's actually a footnote in a maimer where the Rebbe struggles with this question, that when you're speaking about the teva of the neshama, that the teva of the neshama is to give itself away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without any cheshbonos, the Rebbe says there has to somehow be free will there as well, even though it's an union of Teva. But in the last class that I gave you, and throughout this cycle of Tanya, one of the words that I've made important to our learning is these two understandings of the word Teva. Perek Yutes is talking about the neshama, it's talking about Yechida, it's talking about the Pinta Leyid, the Ava Mesuteres. So the Alter Rebbe here is introducing us to this use of the word, the idea that a Yid is prepared to give himself away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any consideration for self whatsoever. V'gam lamata, he says, here and over there is not going to exist. Nevertheless, kach hu retzayna b'tiva. And b'teva zeh, over here teva means that you can't explain it at all. Normally teva means you can explain it completely. This is my limitation. This is my personality. This is what the Eibishter gave me. Over here we're using the same word, but we're using it in a very, very, very different way. This is what has been going on in this Perek. That a Yid has a neshama, and the neshama has a connection to Hashem, it goes to the Medeg of Chochmah, in which Ein Seif rests. And because of this neshama, which is in Chochmah, which rests in the Chochmah, and inside if you have Ein Seif, a Yid is a Teva that is ready to give himself away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any considerations.
How does this look in like practical daily life? Like which way like live on and how about the practical?
The ideal way to live is called Mashiach. That's the ideal way to live. So either you're there already or you struggle. Struggle is not an option. Struggle's life.
It's your nature to do the right thing.
So the way you, so again, I asked you which teva do you want me to talk about? We're talking about two different tevas. If you're talking about the first teva, I can explain it to you. Talking about the second teva, that's already much more difficult to explain. The argument that Alter Rebbe is making is a very, very important argument. And a lot of people say it. Are human beings inherently good, or are human beings inherently animals? So we love to blame Freud. Freud said people are animals. And Chabad's best friend, Viktor Frankl, said, no, human beings are animals. It's so not, I know a psychiatrist who's an expert on Freud. He says, people who say that don't know, they never studied him. So to me, it's all trivial. It's not that important who said what, and this one is good and this one is bad. Torah says a human being is good. And anything which is not good is a change in what the human being is fundamentally. And this is a practical lesson. The practical lesson is I do not need to change myself. I need to get in touch with my best self. Or to say it in different words, we don't do things that are wrong because we think they're right, or we think they don't matter. We do things that are wrong because we're weak. Because if we were strong, we would do what our nature is, and our nature is to do good. Alter Rebbe brings this idea also in a slightly different way, but this is the practical use of this is, I know me, and I know that I'm good. It's hard to be good. I have to let myself be what I am naturally. I think that's a very practical insight into people. I think so. I do think so. As far as this, am I answering you or am I not answering you?
No, it makes sense. Basically, you're saying by tuning into yourself and your true voice.
Right. It's freeing yourself from what's been added to you. That's the word. Rather than trying to create a new you. The teva of a human being is good. This is basic to Torah, and it's certainly basic to Chassidus, and not only in the neshama. Even a goy has that teva. The second idea of teva, which is the Mesiras Nefesh, I don't know if it's practical every day. That's special moments. And one of those ideas is tshuva. The most practical use for tshuva, if I can give you an example which you can relate to, is the work on being besimcha. The job of making yourself besimcha could be a mashal for what it means to do something which is beyond your reason. because it's so difficult and so important. It's also understandable. But this has to come from the neshama. I don't think that can come from the teva of the nefesh habahamis. Okay? I think you got to do it first, and then the doing will bring the tapping in. Simcha is one of the only midas that faking it works. Acting happy, acting rich is not going to make you rich. Acting smart is certainly not going to make you smart. But acting happy will make you happy. It's a makif. You're asking questions, I'm giving answers. But nothing is easy. Go ahead, Rebbitzin.
Man is bad to begin with. So how am I misunderstanding what you say, or am I misunderstanding what you?
Well, the answer to that question is that both are true. Let me ask you a question. In Pashas Noach, the Eibusha says, "Lo oisev lakaos oras ki yetzer leva adam ramen yora." In 2 weeks ago's Pasha, he uses exactly the same words. And he says, "Emchas ha'adam ha'shabarasi," because the Yetzer Leiv Adam Ramen. The same logic that Alter Rebbe uses in Noach, the Eibush uses in Noach, not to destroy man, he uses in Bereshis, yes, to destroy man. A human being has a Yetzer Hara, but a human being also has a nature. Now, I want to clarify what that means. There's 2 Yetzer Haras in a person. There's the Yetzer Hara. There's the Yetzer Hara within the Teva. And then there's the Yetzer Hara which is without the Teva. Yetzer Hara within the Teva is, if it's kosher, I want to enjoy it. If it's permitted, I want to have it. In other words, the Teva of Nefesh Habahamis isn't holy. He's natural, he's an animal, but he's an animal with limits. Those limits mean I don't want to do against the Eibishter's will. But if the Eibishter lets me, and one of the arguments which is made in my Morim is that the teva within the nature is what brings a person to chas v'shalom do the teva outside of the nature. You understand? So there's a nature that the animal soul has. Then there's the Yetzer Hara which is consistent with that nature. And then there's the Yetzer Hara which is the violation of the nature, less than that nature. And the way it's explained in my Morim, it's a Kutas Amayin. The second Maimed at the beginning, the Alter Rebbe Rashab asks this question. And he answers that to do an Aveda, you have to train yourself. And it begins by giving into the nature of the animal soul, which is within the box of the nature of the animal soul. And we slip from things which I don't need, but are not, which I don't need, but I'm allowed, into things which I don't need, that I'm also not allowed. That's why we talk about a skafia. That's why we say a person has to discipline himself, not just about Avedas, but even about things which are not Avedas, because that's how you stay away from slipping from the Yetzer Hara which is within my nature to the Yetzer Hara which is outside of my nature. Am I answering you?
Where does it say anywhere that being by nature is good?
Oh, Nasa Adam b'tzameinu k'museinu, ki b'tzelem Elokim asas Adam. That's part of his personality. That's not just esoteric, that's real. Man was made in the image of God. Like I have the Hayom Yom. And this is not unique to Jews, this is unique to human beings. Man was made to walk upright so he should see the sky. And this idea that man is seeing the sky, it's in his personality to think higher. Higher doesn't only mean more money and have a house on a higher hill. Higher means more consistent with what humanity is. There's a very big debate in society, you know. The way the debate is articulated is in wording that I wouldn't want to even use in a class here. But the debate is, human beings need to be taught to be good, or do they already know? If a human being is not taught to be good, he's not going to know by himself. Please make this quick, yeah? You follow what I'm saying? So some people say human beings are animals. Other people say, and you can't help it, right? Other people say, you don't need to tell me how to be good. I know good from my own self. And we agree with that. We just argue that it's not enough. It's not enough for all kinds of reasons. And one of them is because you have a Yetzer Hara. So this is the idea is that the goodness in a person is basic to the person. You see, I want to know if I'm answering you or if I'm not answering you. I cannot see it.
You're comforting me.
Oh, okay, good. And not just you, myself also, right? Right, right,
The good ones are just, they're
When you have in Tanya,
trying to be good.
when you have in Tanya, light pushes away darkness by nature. There's two concepts in that. Light pushes away darkness by nature, because Kedusha is stronger than Klippa. And light pushes away darkness by nature because goodness is natural. The second is the Nefesh HaBahamis. It's a more basic idea. Okay, Rabbi said, let's move on. Now, like I said to you, I actually listened to the class that I gave you, Zion Elul. I'm assuming it's 8 Sundays ago. And the last thing we learned was that now that we have two concepts of Teva, we have Teva that we understand it in all of creation, and the Teva that we understand it in the Neshama of a Yid, that the Teva of a Neshama of a Yid is called Chochmah, and it's called Kedusha, and Shabbat Sheda Ein Seif Baruch Hu, Ein Seif is inside of it, and because of it, a Yid has the preparedness to give itself away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'mayla mitam v'das. The Alter Rebbe said, "V'teva zeh b'chol sita de kedusha." Anything which is kadosh has this, not just a Jew. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya chapter 6, a long time ago, Perek Vav, that the meaning of the word kedusha is batel, let's say, is barach, batel to Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe says that when you say that kedusha is batel to Hashem, you should add the word teva. Kedusha is batel Hashem beteva, and the bittul to Hashem of kedusha beteva is beyond understanding. But this Klippa doesn't have. This second concept of Teva, Klippa doesn't have. So now let's go to the text and let's start learning about Klippa. V'hu heipech. V'hu heipech. I'll tell you in a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 lines from the bottom of page 48. Last word line. V'hu heipech mamish mebechinas ha-klipa v'sitarach. It's mamish, the opposite, it's the contrary of klipa and sitarachara. Klipa means a peel, a shell, that means a containment. Sitarachara means the other side, and the Alter Rebbe taught us in chapter 6 that the meaning of the other side is just not bottle. If you're not bottle, then you're klipa. That when something comes from klipa, this teva it doesn't have. The idea that it's sacrificing to Hashem, that sacrificing to Hashem without any cheshbon, it doesn't have. And the Alter Rebbe continues and he says, from which comes the Nefesh HaBahamis of a goy. The Avdin legarmayo, that everything they do is for themselves. The Amen, they say, have, give me. V'haliteni, and pour it down my throat. Liyesh, to be, yesh v'dovar b'fnei atzma. Yesh means an independent entity, and the thing unto themselves, kanal, as we discussed before. Before means in Perek Vav, the union from klipa, which is heipech b'chinas ha'chochma, which is the opposite of chochma. Now notice the Rebbe here he's skipping klipas noiga. He's ignoring klipas noiga. So you wonder, how does a guy who keeps Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach fit into the scheme? L'chayra, a guy who keeps Sheva b'nei neach is also klipas neiga. So the Alter Rebbe talks here about the word umes ha'ilab. It doesn't mean stam azay goy. It means a guy who stopped keeping, who's not keeping the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach. Not. Because if he's keeping Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach, he belongs to the teva that we spoke about before. That he has a certain limitation. And this is evil. This klipa is taka evil. In other words, this klipa not only doesn't have the higher concept of teva, it doesn't even have the lower concept of teva. It's evil. It's ra. What makes it evil? That it's a yesh v'dov b'fnei atzmei, that it's completely separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It self-identifies. It identifies with itself, doesn't identify with the lakus, and it's the opposite of Kedusha. Kedusha is bottled Hashem above reason. If I may use these words, and I hope I'm not wrong, Klipas Noiga is not bottled to Hashem above reason, but it has a teva, which is basically good, basically limited in how bad it could be. This is lower than both of those ideas of teva. It's shalosh klipas atmei zagami. It's evil. It's against Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and it's being against Hakadosh Baruch Hu means its entire reality is self. Klipa is self. Teva complete doesn't want to acknowledge the Eibishter at all.
Was it created this way?
Some of it was. When it comes to a goy who has free will, you have to say that he chose it. But it's a tzadachi and gadol. The book on goyim has never been written. You know, when you read Tanya, you get the impression that all goyim are evil, but it's not true. The Rebbe told people in Yechidus, there's a lady, I actually corresponded with her. Her Yechidus is now in a book. I actually asked her, Mrs. Fishman from Worcester, Massachusetts. I asked her to repeat it to me that she asked the Rebbe, is it true that all goyim are bad? And the Rebbe said, no, goyim are, who keep Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach have a neshama from, have this teva, have at least the lower concept of teva. That what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that goyim are from shalosh mitzvahs means the goyim who don't keep Sheva mitzvahs. Why the Alter Rebbe simplifies, I don't know. But a guy who's a chassid u'maseilim, a guy who's a ger teishav, a guy who's doing Sheva mitzvahs, especially if he's doing what Eibishter said, is not klipas me'ezagami. He's living within his teva. You understand? At least the first idea of teva. And this is called evil. This is called dera. Now, it's been a very, very long time since I told the story. I have a story that I made up when I was teaching kids. Tanya, I created a story. And I'm going to finish the class with the story. I'm going to tell you a story, then I'm going to stop. And we know the next Sunday we'll continue the story. We'll continue the discussion. It's a mashal. This entire, what I'm about to tell you is a mashal. It's not written in any book. It's just how I present it to my students. That you have a king who builds a nation. And of course, building a nation involves a variety of steps. The first step, the first responsibility of any government is to provide safety. That their citizens should be safe. Safe borders, safe. After you provide safety, then you have to provide opportunity, infrastructure. And this king provides his country with safety, and he provides them with opportunity, and the country thrives. And the country achieves a condition of incredible success and affluence and even sustainability. And then the king makes an experiment. He makes an experiment. He calls in two people. And he says to them like this, I'm dividing the country in half. But not half, 50%, 50%. I'm dividing it 10%, 90%. To one, I'm going to give most of the wealth, and most of the land, and most of the infrastructure. But you're going to be cut off from me. The other, I'm going to give a very small percentage of the country, and a very small amount of the infrastructure and the wealth. But you're going to have me as a support. And let's see who succeeds better. So the way the story goes is that the king, the prince, who's given 90%, so much wealth and so much opportunity, what is the first thing he does? He makes a moratorium on work. Let's all live it up. Let's enjoy our largesse. Let's enjoy our successes. And they have a fabringen, and they party, and they eat and drink. And then when they finish partying and eating and drinking, the way the story plays out is that they squander the resources that they have, and they're not renewable. So they take from the other. And they take a little bit more, and they take a little bit more. And the other nation gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But because they're connected to the king, they survive. And eventually the tide turns. If you follow the king's advice, you live within your means. You preserve the resources in a way that's renewable and sustainable. And eventually the country that was given all the wealth, because they were cut off from the king, used it in an unsustainable way, and they self-destruct. The other kingdom, which was much, much smaller, because they're connected to the king, they use it in a sustainable way, and eventually they get everything back. That's the mashal. And this is the nimshal is This is the difference between Kedusha and Klip. The Eibishter made Yidden in a way that they're Atam Ma'at Mikol Amim. They're the smallest nation. But we're connected to the Eibishter. The other nations are very rich and successful and powerful, but they're cut off from the Eibishter. And each one is given largesse, each one is given wealth. But they're given wealth in a way which is separate from a lakus, so they run their course. There's a cycle. Part of that cycle is incredible success and wealth, until eventually it burns out. And the tiny little Jew is always there. You know this already. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And when I teach my students this, I give them the paper. Mark Twain wrote an article. It's a long, long article. At the very end of the article, there's a paragraph that all the Jews culled out of the big article, and Jews celebrate this paragraph. If you read the whole article, you'll see it's not necessarily so favorable. I have the whole article. It's very, very long and boring. If you wrote an article like that today, you'd lose your job. It's pages and pages. It's like a book. It's an opinion. Wrote in 1903, almost 120 years ago. But at the end of the article, he talks about the Jew, and he writes, the Jew has seen all the great empires of the world come, try to destroy them, and then disappear and become stardust in the Milky Way. And the Jew is still here, showing no weakening of his parts, no diminishing of his sharp mind and his acute senses, and he still is so successful in all areas of life. And he finishes with the words, what is the secret of his immortality? That's how that paragraph finishes. What is the secret of his immortality? And the answer to that question is, we're not smarter than any other nation, we're not more talented than any other nation, we're not more gifted than any other nation, but we're plugged in. That's the answer. That's the answer. We're not better than anybody else. But the Eibishter has a special relationship with us, and because he has a special relationship with us, we're connected. And this connection is what makes us immortal. That's the Taich Kedusha. Klippa can be very wealthy and very successful, but it's separated. And because it's separated, it cycles. It has a boom and a bust. It has a time that's very successful, and then it collapses. And I've gone through this discussion with you many times about Poland. I find this very, very fascinating. I find this very, very fascinating. Shia Munchen, who's now Olav Shalom, published a few books, published many books, but at the end they published a couple of books. And one of his books is called, I think, Masa Badichev, Masa Acharin. He has a very interesting story with many versions of it. That in Russia, in the beginning of the 1800s, before the war with Napoleon, the Kaiser, who's Alex, made a very, very big fine against the Jewish people. And there was a big debate amongst the tzaddikim. Some of the tzaddikim said that this fine was because of Avedas that Yidden were doing, and they had their own shita how it should be approached. But their attitude was, we have to be mevatel the gezeda, we have to find ways of not getting the government to take this huge levy, this tax against the Jews. And the Alter Rebbe said that when the king of Poland asks Jewish people for money, they have to give. Alter Rebbe said the fine should be paid. And he said a very interesting word. A very, very interesting word. The Jewish people went from country to country in Golos. Right? I don't have to tell that to you. When the Golos started, we were in Mesopotamia, in Asia Minor, we were in Bavel, in Iraq, right? Those countries. Then we moved to Western Europe, Spain, France, England, and Germany. And then we moved to Eastern Europe, right? The Jews have been journeying through the world, and now we're in the Americas, in the whole world. So the Alter Rebbe said that when Yidden finished in Western Europe, they had to go to Eastern Europe, no country wanted them. And what the Alter Rebbe meant when he said no country, didn't mean the physical country, he meant the malach of that country. The ruchnius. Because the malach of the country say, Yidden are going to come to our country, they're going to stay here for a few hundred years, they're going to take all of our wealth and they're going to leave. And we're going to be impoverished. And the malach of Poland said, I'll take the Jews. On a condition. that the Yidden have to give me a pile of gold as tall as a sus v'rechvei, as tall as a horse and a rider. So the Alter Rebbe said, when the king of Poland asks, we have to give. I just want to add an epilogue to that, an afterthought to that, which I also find very compelling. And to me, these things fit together. They fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. But these are words from Rebbes that are all in the Ruchni Yizdika worlds. That after the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, after the Eastern Bloc was dissolved, there was a big discussion about the Jewish people and Poland. David Chase, who is now Olav HaSholem, was a Polish Jew. And the Polish government wanted commerce, they wanted business. And if you want business, I hate to say it, you got to have Jews. And David Chase met, I don't know if you remember that Polish man who was later the leader of Poland. He was part of the opposition. He was a school teacher. Remember his name, Waleska, something like that. He met David Chase personally. David Chase gave him $1 from the Rebbe. He knew who the Rebbe was. He had a photo of the Rebbe. He was very makir. So there was a big discussion about bringing Jews back into Poland. Poland killed 3 million Jews. And they helped the Nazis. That's a fact. There are very few Jews, relatively speaking, in Poland today. And I have been told that the Goyim in Poland are trying to understand what they killed. They're trying to understand. Polish Goyim are anti-Semitic. They always were. Slavs are anti-Semitic. I don't know why, but it's a fact. So the Rebbe was asked about this. Rabbi Cheskel Besser Olav HaSholem came to the Rebbe with Ronnie Lauder, who was a billionaire, who had an interest in re-establishing Jews in Poland, and the presumption was they're going to come mostly from Russia. Poland had 3 million Jews. What do I have now? A few thousand. They bring more Jews into Poland. And the Rebbe said unequivocally, I see no future for the Jewish people in Poland. You have to help the Jewish people who are there, but the thought of re-importing Jews into Poland, the Rebbe said, I see no future for Jewish people in Poland. The Rebbe said it a few times. Once by dollars, I saw the video. But there were apparently also private meetings where the Rebbe said the same thing. Now, I don't know if they listened to the Rebbe or not. I know the Gabi Germany for sure, they brought Jews back into Germany, Russian Jews. But as the Rebbe said, I don't know whether they listened to the Rebbe or not. But what does the Rebbe mean? What does the Rebbe mean with those words? I see no future Jewish people in Poland. The simple answer is, and this has played itself out in the last 30 years, the Rebbe fears for anti-Semitism. It's not a good place for Jewish people to live because there's going to be anti-Semitism. The deeper answer is, whatever sparks the Jewish people had in Poland, they took. They're done. That beater is finished, just like it says in Chumash. You're now allowed to go back to Mitzrayim. And it says in Kisvei Arizal, you're now allowed to go back to Mitzrayim because whatever sparks are there are finished. So the Rebbe said a similar thing about Poland. Now I'm speaking in circles. My point is, a Yid is Kedusha. Kedusha means connected. And because the Yid is Kedusha, Yid is connected, the result of that is that he's eternal. As long as the Eibishter is, he is. Klipa is separate. Particularly when you're talking about a klipa, which is not klipas noiga, but it's shoulders klipas atmeis verois legamri. And again, the way I understand it is that when something is shoulders, it's even lower than the teva. But even tzadachi and godel, because today for animals also have a teva. So alles Sachen davon durchtrachten. So the Alter Rebbe says, klipa is the opposite of kedusha. Kedusha has a nature that it wants to give itself away to Hashem. It can't even explain it. And Klippa has a nature that it wants to completely deny the Eibishter. Not deny that there is an Eibishter. Deny that the Eibishter has any balabatschkeit over them. And then the Alter Rebbe continues. I'm just going to read and translate. I'll explain next week. Heipech bechinas ha-chochma. The idea of Klippa is the exact opposite of Chochma. Chochma is a bittul and a teva, which is above reason. And Klippa is the opposite of bittul, which is below reason. V'lachein nekroyim mesim, which is why Klippa is called death. Ki ha-chochma techaya. For something to be living, it has to be connected to Chochma. Uksiv, it also is written, Yamusu, that there is death. V'loi b'chochma, there's no Chochma. In other words, anything which has Chochma, anything which is connected to Hashem, anything which is a bittul to the Eibishter, that in our conversation, is a teva which is above reason, lives, and anything which lacks that chokhmah, lacks that connection to Hashem, which is above reason, is called misa. And then he adds the words, V'chein harishoyim u'peisha Yisrael. A yid also, who is a sinner, who's done Averis, and if he's done Averis, not only is he away from the teva which is above reason, he's even lower than the teva which is within reason. So when a yid finds himself in that ma'amad matzev, so we say kedem shebo lidei nisoyim l'kadosh Hashem, before they're tested and they're given an opportunity for kiddush Hashem, which brings out their elikus. They're also called klipa, and they're also called misa. I just hope the class was clear. And to whatever extent we went in a straight line. Okay, good morning.